Today we're going to be talking about the mighty fine trolls of the world. I'm joined today by Dr. Jonathan Stea.
Yeah.
Stea, thank you again. And my good friend, longtime friend, Jay Adams. Dr. Jonathan Stea is a clinical psychologist and a professor at U Calgary, right?
Yeah, an adjunct assistant professor there.
Okay, awesome. And then Jay Adams is a social media director extraordinaire, expert, has been doing it for a long time for big organizations like the Atlanta Falcons, hospitals, cities, you name it. So both of you are well versed in the topic today. So thank you for jumping on this, and I think it's going to be an exciting, interesting one for sure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and it's kind of serendipitous how this happened. Kind of got tagged on Twitter, and it seems that we all kind of have something in common here. So I'm happy to chat about it.
Yeah, and thank you for having me as well. And Alicia, you and I have had plenty of private conversations about this very topic, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. So it's going to be good to kind of get some of this out in the open and talk through some of the stuff, because even as a social media professional, I'm wildly interested in what Dr. Stea has to say about the topic, because it's just fascinating. So
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's just kind of fascinating how our different perspectives are kind of converging. I mean, I just found myself in the thick of it just as a health professional, because part of our ethical duty is to advocate for evidence-based healthcare, and it just so happens that many people are targeted for that kind of harassment. So that's kind of my perspective, and then I'm hearing that you guys have a different angle on it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that Jay and I have been talking about wanting to do for years now, because like you said, our perspective on our ends, we're obviously close friends, but he's on, the social media side of it, and I was kind of on the receiving end of a lot of it. And so I would defer to Jay for a lot of things. And he would share, his knowledge with me and his expertise on, how to deal or how to cope or whatnot. So I'm definitely glad, and I'm glad that you're here too, because like you just said, you've been seeing it on the medical side, which is, I think, something, I don't know about you, Jay, but I didn't really assume would be a thing, right? Because it's medical. It's like coming from medical professionals and experts. Like, why would I?
There's, you and I have had the conversation, is like that we guessed that there's a very real mental health side of what we see now. As I'm advising you through some tough times, I'm coming at it from a PR standpoint. Like, how do you handle this without, completely blowing up your brand, right? Hashtag brand. But from the mental health side, like that part of it is like to know what's happening. I think, first of all, I think it can help give targets of trolling a little bit of power in just understanding what's happening. As a social media professional, and I think we'll get into this later on, but I'm not unaffected by this stuff as I do it for my job. And I've found myself in situations where it's been, I've had to get away from it, do the digital detox, because it just messes with you after a while, all that negativity. But getting into some of this stuff about how, what we're learning, really, because it is still so new, what we're learning about what motivates people, and who is most likely to be doing this kind of stuff is, that's the stuff I'm really excited to get into.
Yeah. So we have trolls, right? Is there a difference between a troll and a hater? Or is there a difference? Or are they the same?
I'd have to consult with Urban Dictionary on that, because I'm not real sure. I just learned fleek like not too terribly long ago, so I'm like woefully behind on my slang. But yeah, I mean,
I've been thinking a lot about this stuff too. I mean, I think it's helpful to think of a troll as really just a conversation disruptor, right? It's sort of someone that kind of jumps into the conversation, and there's many different kinds of names for it because they all kind of get at different aspects of the phenomena. So we've seen trolling, we've seen shit posting, we've seen harassment. There's all sorts of different ways of conceptualizing what trolling is, and sometimes it might be a helpful way to think of trolling as kind of on the, you can think of it on a spectrum of intensity and kind of threat level, right? So maybe trolling is a bit on the milder end. Like, can have different motivations. So in the medical perspective, some people might troll when they're kind of motivated by a set of ideas like anti-vaccine ideas or racism or gender, something like that, where they're kind of just going in there and they're just kind of doing it from a sort of an annoying perspective. They just want to irritate and cause a bit of trouble. And then I think when the trolling sort of bleeds into the more severe end of the spectrum, when it becomes consistent and targeted and direct, then it kind of moves into more legal territory, which is kind of harassment, and that can be really concerning. And there's another layer I think that's really important here, is that harassment can you can think of it as kind of overt and covert. So overt is sort of the name calling, the personal attacks, the character assassinations. With mental health professionals and medical professionals, there's a lot of libel, so sort of spreading lies about people to try to tarnish their professional identities. So there is that kind of targeted harassment, which is kind of overt. And then you can have the kind of covert aspects of it, which is sort of like Twitter stalking, where you may have blocked someone, but people are still creeping you behind a block, and there's called subtweeting, so they're talking about you behind your back even though they're not tagging you. Those sorts of things. And there's another phenomenon which we can talk about with that is called Stea lining, which is sort of just a really annoying trolling tactic as well.
Right, and you wrote an article about Stea lining, right?
Yeah, I wrote a kind of a satire, kind of facetious way of talking about Stea lining, just because it's such an annoying and absurd way of trying to spread an idea. So it's basically someone that kind of just parachutes into a conversation and asks you like 1,000 really annoying questions that their ears are plugged, their eyes are shut, and they're not listening to you. They're just rambling on and on and don't care.
They're just playing devil's advocate. That's what they say.
Right. But in a really, really annoying, awful, terrible way. Nothing productive whatsoever.
I think another useful way of thinking about it is it's done in bad faith, right? Because it's not in good faith. It's not with a view towards learning something or having respectful conversation. It's really just about having their voice heard and you shut down.
Right. And I think that is a lot of what we see on social media. I've always kind of described social media in general, and especially for some reason Twitter, as like this giant house party where everyone's just shouting at everyone, and like over here people are hanging from the chandeliers, and over here people are going buck wild over here, and no one's really hearing anybody, and everybody's just hammered out of their minds and just screaming at each other at the same time. That's what it feels like sometimes. It can be exhausting, right?
Yeah, it certainly can be. It can be a cesspool, and then it can be a place for a lot of good as well. But I think we see a lot of both, like a lot of overwhelming both aspects.
Yes, absolutely. So getting back into the mental health part of it, what have you seen, both of you, in regards to social media and trolling affecting the mental health of the target? And then we'll go ahead and talk about the other side of it, the person doing the trolling.
I'm going to let you take.
You're like raise your hand.
You can, Doc. You can start this one, and I'll jump in with some other stuff.
Well, yeah, sure. Thanks. I mean, you alluded to it, Jay. I mean, it can be devastating for some people. I mean, we're social creatures. That's a part of our human nature, and we don't like to be targeted, and we don't like to be screamed at. And you know, the online world is relatively new, evolutionarily speaking. And so when we're being bombarded and mobbed online, and we're being trolled, then it can produce a whole host of um, overwhelming and mixed emotions. It can be confusing. It can be anger, anxiety, and not knowing what to do about that. It can be quite discombobulating for someone. And so when that happens, it's very important to have um, a solid coping skills repertoire in place, because um, yeah, it's not a comfortable thing. And so it's important to be able to know how to handle it, and that's not always easy. And if our brains, and if we're not used to um, practicing how to handle such things, um, emotion dysregulation, it can be very emotion dysregulating. And so we need to be able to handle our emotions in those cases. And there's a variety of ways to do that, but it's important to think about that. And we can talk more about it, but above all, I think one of the most important things to do in that situation is to reach out for social support, because people can feel quite alone when that happens. And social support can be incredibly
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think you know, there are a lot of different elements that um, end up at play uh, for the target, and I think one of them is that, you know, the kinds of things that we say to each other online are not the things that we say to each other face to face, and so I think there's a very real element of this. Just a wave of negativity that comes with some of the things that people say, because it's just so out there compared to like the criticisms you might receive in day-to-day life. So it's like, because it's so different than what you're used to, you almost have to pay more attention to it as the target, right? And you almost have to end up with that emotional, visceral reaction, that primal reaction that you can't really control. But that's what they're after, right? That's what they want. They want that kind of reaction from you. They want to know that they've disrupted your day, and all that. But it's, I think from a target's point of view, it does end up being one of those things that you can't help but focus on, simply because it's different. It's outside the realm of what you normally experience on a day-to-day basis. I think, you know, I grew up bullied as a kid. And so whenever I'm in one of those situations, it's like, you know, I go back to that child place of being mocked and bullied and things like that. And it's like, I have to remind myself, hey, I'm an adult now. Like, I can handle this in a very composed and from a place of power, essentially. But I think there's some very real things that trolls play on, like that sense, prey on, excuse me, which is, you know, that sense of powerlessness, that sense of helplessness that I think you can't help but feel, simply because you're in a situation that you're not often in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely like I can only go off of my own, you know, experience. So I was used to things being said about me, or maybe a person saying this or that, or a jab here, a jab there. I will tell you, there was nothing like a mob of people saying these awful things. I'd never had that before. So if anybody has gone through that, you know, I think a lot of times of like high school students or middle schoolers, just students, you know, that aren't into adulthood. And, you know, when you're that age, sometimes it's hard to realize that, you know, some things don't matter when you get older, or things are absolutely different. But, and the fact that they can't escape that type of bullying, you know, when they go home, because it's right there online. It's just like what Doc said. It's a very lonely thing. And when it happens to you, sometimes your friends can't relate. So I absolutely agree that you got to find a support system somewhere in there. For me, it was, you know, obviously I would talk to my husband about it because he's been dealing with it for 20 years, but bear in mind, he's also used to it. So it's like nothing new for him. When it just starts, it's very overwhelming, I would say. And so I started going to a therapist that, you know, was used to dealing with public figures or people in the spotlight. And I remember he told me, he said, on average, out of everybody I see that deals with this, it takes you approximately 2 to 3 years to really get used to this. And I was like, oh, fuck, I got another 2 years of this, you know? And, but he said, you know, and he said he had what was it? One of his clients, obviously didn't say who, but a campaign manager for someone who was running for a political office called him and said, hey, I have this guy that I'm going to be managing. I'd like to make him a client of yours. And my therapist was like, yeah, sure. Like, let's set that up. So they had their first meeting and the guy walks in and sits down and was like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't need therapy. I'm fine. And my therapist was like, you're going to need me. And so he starts his campaign and all the haters and trolls and, you know, awful things come slamming his way. And I mean, that guy was in there, he said, religiously. And it's, you know, you need someone to be like, you know, they're like gnats that it will never really go away. And these are the tools to cope with it. And I think it's not a very common thing to be hated for who you are just as a human. I don't think that's like a normal thing. So for that to be a thing from many directions coming at you is a tough thing to deal with. But like you said, coping skills, for me, it was humor, finding humor in it. Just take that screenshot, throw it in with all your friends and make fun of it. Make fun of the person, just rip them apart, say those awful things you would never publicly say. I mean, some people would publicly say it, obviously, but just, you know, take that power away. If you can laugh about it, it helps so much. And then, you know, responding, we'll get into that later. But yeah, I just know for me that helped majorly.
Absolutely. I also like to validate your experience too, because there's been studies on this, and there's been a recent study just in the medical world too. It was by David Grimes and colleagues, and they basically surveyed a bunch of more high-profile health experts about their experiences with trolling and harassment, and it was prevalent. There was a lot of it, and they would also endorse experiencing mental health concerns like and anxiety symptoms from that stuff. So, you know, it's by no means an isolated kind of thing. And so that just speaks to the idea that it's really important to learn how to be able to cope with it if it does happen.
Yeah. So what about the other side of it? Like, what's happening on the mental health side of the instigator or the person attacking? What's going on there? Because I would love to know.
This is what I've been excited.
Here's the juicy part. We're gonna get to the big banana of the bunch here.
Ready to go? Let's do it. So I think I've been thinking about this a lot. There's a number of ways to think about it, and I think the most helpful way to think about it is to divide it sort of into, because trolling is multi-causal. There's not one single cause of the behavior. It's the interaction of many different things kind of coming together like a perfect storm, right? And you can divide these factors in two broad kind of ways. So one thing is sort of things outside of us. So we call those environmental factors. And that includes things like, there was a great paper by a guy named John Suler in 2004, and he wrote about the online disinhibition effect. So that's kind of the idea that you put up a screen and we kind of become disinhibited. So kind of like the liquid courage that you might get from alcohol, like your kind of inhibitions go down and you're more likely to say things that you otherwise wouldn't say. It's sort of this, it kind of produces an illusion of invincibility and invisibility. Like you can't be seen and no one can kind of touch you. Of course, that's an illusion and it's a false sense of security. But that kind of mental veil, it's a fake, but it's sort of a veil. That kind of, I don't know, it kind of turns the release valve onto all of the negative things in human nature we can kind of spew on each other. So that's just sort of a broad environmental factor that can happen to anyone. We're all probably more likely to say things online when we're kind of behind the screen than we otherwise would face to face. So that's kind of this phenomenon that he described. If we're anonymous, that's like this effect on steroids. It's like even higher. Like it's even more illusion of invincibility and invisibility. And then you kind of add group factors into that. So there's a phenomenon called groupthink, where the decisions of a group are kind of the desire is to conform to the group, and so you're more likely to want to do things that are in the service of the group rather than the individual. So basically, that's kind of tribalism. So if you perceive yourself as part of a group, then the group is going to attack an individual. So that kind of adds more fuel onto the fire of this online disinhibition and this anonymity.
Mob mentality.
So those are all just kind of, those are just kind of environmental factors that can kind of happen to anyone. Then that stuff interacts with internal factors. So that was kind of external, and these are kind of internal factors. So things inside of us, which are the things like personality kind of tendencies and other kind of beliefs. So for example, the personality tendencies, which we kind of alluded to a bit here, is, there's been research showing that there's a particular kind of tendency called a sadistic tendency, and that has been strongly linked to online trolling. And so what a personality tendency or a personality trait is really just a deeply ingrained pattern of thinking and of doing things. And so sometimes in what's called everyday sadism or sadistic tendencies, there's some people that if you were to score high on this kind of tendency, those kind of people are more likely to experience pleasure from demeaning and from demeaning and kind of dominating people and kind of and getting that from a source of a feeling of dominance or power. And so that kind of sadistic tendency is linked to trolling behavior. There's also other kind of personality tendencies. One way of thinking about personality is called a dark triad. I won't get into all of the details, but it's called psychopathy and Machiavellianism and narcissism. And so these kind of three personality tendencies plus sadistic tendencies, they call that the dark tetrad. All four of these have been linked to trolling, with sadistic tendencies most strongly associated with trolling and harassment. And so when someone has that kind of tendency, they're more likely to engage in trolling. So that's one aspect to the internal factor. And there's other things going on. So that can interact with other things, such as what we might call ideological beliefs, or they're kind of deep-seated beliefs that you have about things. So in the medical world, that can be anti-vaccine beliefs or anti-psychiatry beliefs, where you don't believe in mental illness. Like people can get very married to these beliefs, and they can over-identify with them, and kind of it becomes part of their worldview and how they see the world. And when people don't like their worldviews poked and prodded around, because that's a really threatening experience for people. You don't want to have your worldviews threatened, because then you don't know how to make sense of anything. And so when people are doing that, such as medical professionals, where it's actually their ethical duty is to call out harmful information, that can be really threatening for people, and that can motivate harassment, and that can motivate trolling. But it doesn't have to be confined to medical topics. Like you can have you can be over-identify with beliefs about gender and racism and other sorts of things.
You see these conspiracy theories, and now it's a lot of political stuff. And
exactly.
And the research, it seems like social media is just fertile ground for this stuff to be happening, because you've got all the conspiracy theories out there. You've got just, politics alone is a hot button issue, regardless of all the other stuff, all the other factors that go into it. This seems like great ground for all of this stuff to be happening.
Yeah, and I think of them as risk factors too, right? The more that you have, the better perfect storm you have for trolling, right? So it maybe not be, maybe you don't need any one of these, but when they all kind of interact, and you get that kind of environment. The other thing that's important to note too is that when people believe that the trolling is justified and deserved in some way, if they think that, like that you've committed some sort of misdoing or a crime or something, then that in their mind kind of interacts with these sadistic tendencies, and then you're more likely to see trolling behavior as well.
So I want to bring up one study that I read that was, I think it was last year, and what they found in this study is that too many people online are used to saying things without getting punched in the mouth. I believe that was Dr. Ice-T who put that out. That's one of my favorites. No, but seriously, I mean, it's what you just went through is way more than I expected. And this is a topic I'm interested in just in my personal life is mental health and psychology. And I fully expected there to be some, it's just people projecting, or it's just this, probably a simpler explanation, but to hear all these different factors coming together and then taking into account the environs of social media. And it's like powder keg. I mean, it's pretty alarming. Am I going a little too far with it, or is that, I mean, it was shocking to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very complex behavior to account for, but it's also easy to understand because it's all fairly intuitive to us, right? When we kind of link all of these factors. And social media, I think, kind of makes it ripe for this kind of stuff to happen because it kind of amplifies all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said earlier, there's different degrees of this, right? Like someone may come along and just say, you suck, fuck this blows, and then leave it, and then never think of it again, never return. And then, you go through the middle of it, where to the other end of the spectrum, where people are creating multiple accounts when they're blocked to come back and say more of the things, take things and spread them out as far as they can, because in reality, social media has given everybody a microphone in all kinds of sorts of ways. And there's no way to really take that microphone away from them, because then we start dabbling into, rights, right? So our First Amendment rights, freedom of speech. However, I always like to say freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences.
But I think one important point to that is that, as we're seeing this continue, and social media become more and more and more known as a cesspool, as a place of just breeding negativity, what you find is that the good people, not to put labels on things, but the good people are like, you know what, I don't need this in my life. Let me delete my Facebook account. Let me delete my Twitter account.
Right.
And I think there's a part of it where, these trolls kind of take over that area. And it's because just people who are not gluttons for punishment like myself have left this behind. And so you're just kind of stuck with all that negativity going back and forth. And so we've seen, just from an industry standpoint, we've seen several social platforms start to really dip with usership over a course of a month. And I'm sure the platforms are concerned about that, especially, the monsters like Facebook. But I think that's why it's so important right now, what's happening in terms of these platforms have for a long time put their hands up and said, hey, we're just providing a place here. We're not responsible. This isn't when in actuality, and we probably should have had a legal professional on this panel as well, because holy smokes, that's a whole other side. But where is the culpability with the platforms when this kind of stuff is happening? And I don't want to get into too much of what you've dealt with, Alicia, that you're not comfortable with, but some of the stuff that you would come to me with was, I mean, I don't even have words for it. Like, it's just completely reprehensible things to say to one another. And I mean, and we're talking about like serious stuff like death threats.
Right. We're not, yeah.
This is not like, oh, you suck, or I hate your hair, or whatever. This is like serious stuff.
Like, I hope you get raped.
Yes.
Death threats. Yeah. I mean, Jay, I mean, you know, I'm an open book. It's fine.
Yeah. I know. I don't want to assume, but it's, it's really, alarming to see the different levels, and how this has really continued to get worse. And now we're seeing these platforms say, okay, well, maybe we are a little bit responsible, at least from a standpoint of like, hey, let's not let, you know, this group put X number of dollars towards an ad that's promoting something that's completely discredited and fake. I think what that's going to do is going to start a little bit of a snowball effect with some of these changes and some of these platforms being held more culpable for what they're allowing. And look, when it comes to the three big ones that you think of, you know, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, even though Instagram is owned by Facebook, they're all vastly different in how they police the different things going on. There's no consistency. Some of it seems to not make sense. I had to report a guy who all but told me to go get myself killed on Twitter. And then Twitter comes back to me a couple of weeks later and says, you know what, we really didn't find anything wrong with that tweet. Okay, well, it seems to me like, and we're talking about interpretations here, but they have to get a little bit more involved in what's happening in their platforms, because otherwise it's anarchy. And then you're just confusing a lot of people, because you see, oh, this guy got banned because of this, but this guy over here didn't because of that. And nothing's consistent. So I think from a mental health standpoint, to bring it back home here, like, there's a part for me as a social media professional where it's like, I reported this, I did what they asked me to, I'm doing the right things here, and I'm still not getting any movement whatsoever. And that alone can make you just feel completely helpless, and that, well, you know, it's just people run amok in their worst possible behavior.
The laws are catching up. Doctor, I don't know, I'm not too familiar with what's happening in Canada. I do know different countries regulate this sort of thing differently. But I know just from my experience, I mean, Jay's been with me through it, and I can talk a little bit about it. But I actually have a case now with the police regarding someone, and it is turning into laws here in certain states. Some of them are now starting to recognize what cyber stalking is, cyber harassment is, and they're actually starting to find that, yes, this is absolutely an ever-increasing crime that we're seeing more often. You know, you see it lead to really unfortunate events like suicides in some people, and stalking leading to bigger, scarier things, you know, stalking online to physical threats. So the laws are catching up. They're so slow. They are very slow. And in speaking with the police department here, they're on board for change. And I think legislation is going to be catching up here sooner than later. It's just going to take some time, and it's going to take, you know, more cases and more people coming forward with concrete evidence of like, look, this is something that's potentially, you know, really dangerous. And unfortunately in our country, the cops don't really come into play until something has already happened, right? They're not really in the business of prevention. Of course they love that, but that's not really when they get involved. They unfortunately only get involved after something has happened. So we have to rely on things like legislation to help change the laws so that we can help deter things like this from happening over and over again and escalating to something really quite scary. So, but yeah.
Those are great points, and thank you for sharing that. I know that's kind of vulnerable, so that's really important. I think it also kind of speaks to the idea that, it's a tricky idea that when we find ourselves targeted, we need to also find ways to protect ourselves. And that can be really difficult because it's sort of balancing paying attention to it and not, because it's healthy in many ways to, like we said, social support and kind of and not feeding into it. Same time, if it's on the serious end and there will be legal consequences from it, and people will often need things like screenshots, right? And so that's hard to do, especially if you're trying to block contact with the person. It might be whenever you become aware of it, and it's really finding a really delicate, hard balance between paying attention and not, and that has mental health consequences as well. So yeah, it's certainly not easy, and I'm glad to hear that the laws are catching up to it. I'm not a law expert, so I can't speak to that aspect of it, but I applaud you for seeking legal counsel when you feel threatened enough to do so.
I mean, I just think this particular problem is so new that it's really hard for, the law side of everything to understand it and catch up, and it's ever changing, right? Like these tactics, these things. But I think between the three of us, we can agree that it absolutely is growing as a problem. And like you said, Jay, social media platforms are starting to recognize that, oh, maybe we do have some sort of accountability and responsibility to step in and do something. So, and they're changing too. Some of them are jumping on board with deleting accounts that don't belong to like real names or real people, right? Or multiple accounts, and then they're eventually banning. And YouTube has jumped on it as well. We've seen. So again, it's slow, but we're seeing some changes, and I think that's a good thing. So
from a platform perspective, there was, and I forget who wrote the story, whether it was like The Atlantic or something like that, but what happens behind the scenes at these platforms in terms of policing the different things that go on is really shocking to dive into. And take Facebook for example, because that's what this story highlighted, was essentially these call centers that Facebook has, where these are people, it's a big room of people, just like you would see at a telemarketing agency, right? And picking up the phone, except they're just looking at computers, and they have this inbox that is constantly filling up with reports that are coming in, and they have to be manually looked at, every single one of them. Some of them are, your harmless troll behavior, some of it is your more serious threats, stuff like that. But then they're getting, just awful videos, animal cruelty, cruelty towards others. I mean, just runs the gamut. And I mean, I don't want to misspeak here, but I'm pretty sure I remember from the story that they had somebody in their call center actually committed suicide as a result. So, but that's what we're dealing with. And again, when we're talking about the professional side, which is where I'm at, it's, you could say on one hand, okay, well, it's just people talking to each other. It's not pointed at you. But I think there's a very real aspect of it that becomes internalized, that does become personal. I ran social media for the Atlanta Falcons for 6 years. And let me tell you, I mean, hell hath no fury like an NFL fan tweeting his favorite team on a Wednesday after a Sunday loss. I mean, people are just like pissed off. It ruins their entire week. And I would find myself very often feeling that agitation and taking that emotion on, because I think somebody mentioned it, just that group thing. I think, Alicia, it was you that you just getting this as a group. And while it's not from a personal side, like nobody's attacking me personally, it's like, I'm running that account. That's my account. That's my baby. And you're shitting all over it. And it's just these things that happen with professionals, and just merely policing stuff, or merely being a community manager like I am. It becomes very difficult. And what I'm dealing with now, to a small extent, but still it's there, is the mask controversy, and just all that goes into that. And there's a very real side of that where it's just, again, I think your brain just, and doctor, please tell me if I'm wrong here, but your brain is just like interpreting negativity, and it creates this emotional reaction. And I think that I've felt it. I've felt it very much recently and in my past. And so it's even if you're not like the personal target for something, it still has a very, very profound impact. So I say that when you're tweeting like all your brands that you love and your favorite teams and stuff like that, there is a real person behind that with real emotions, who is, chances are, not getting paid anywhere near what they should be to deal with this stuff. And they're getting it from you, and they're getting it from potentially thousands of other people. So next time you're like pissed off about your cable going out, like maybe let's think about that before we go mouthing off on Twitter. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's like customer service. Those poor people, anybody in customer service, man, they're not the ones fucking up your cable wiring. I remember being a server. I didn't cook your food, but yeah, I'm going to get the brunt of it, so same thing. It is now. Yeah.
Kindness and compassion. We need a lot more of that.
And that's a good jumping off point, because I feel like this is, we could definitely sit here for a very long time and just commiserate. But I think there are very real things that can be done to, if you're a target of this, or if you're just affected by like what you're seeing on social media, I think, and jump in wherever, guys, but like, I think one thing, like the block button, there's so much power in the block button. Like, just use it. You don't have to win an argument. It's the internet. Right. You don't get points. Like, just block somebody and get them out of your life. Too, I think I've done this, and I mentioned it before, but digital detox, like just put the phone down. My God, I was off of Twitter, not off completely, but definitely less than I usually am, about a week ago. And the difference between last week and this week, where I've been more on it and more engaged on Twitter this week, is night and day. I feel like, just everything's nuts right now. Whereas last week I was like, oh, you know what? Life isn't so bad. And it's like, okay, well, that makes a serious impact. But screenshots, reporting things, like still go through the reporting process, because that is important. There are a lot of things that you can do to help protect yourself, to help protect your mental health and your well-being that are just inherent. And I think too often we try to maybe push the boulder uphill by trying to get social media to change, when really, I mean, what is within our control is, first of all, let's again be freaking kind to one another, for crying out loud. Just be nice. It's no different. Like, if you wouldn't say it to somebody to their face in the same room as you, don't say it. Like, just don't. And then again, this spate of just different functionality and things that can give you power where maybe you feel like you don't have any. I think that's important to tap into.
I love those points, Jay. I think they're so on. I really like the idea of the block button as well. We want to use Twitter or whatever social media for respectful engagement. At the same time, no one is owed your engagement. And if you are being, trolled or harassed in any way, then by all means use it. That doesn't always stop the behavior, but it's certainly a way of doing that. If you like, I can kind of get into the psychology behind why the block button is a great thing. It sort of gets into the idea. We've all heard, don't feed the trolls, right? And I think that's really sage advice. And the reason for that is, one framework to think about that is from what's called a behavioral psychology perspective. So it might dredge up images of, think of pigeons doing a dance for food pebbles, right? Like, basically behavioral psychology is the the idea that we can learn about behavior through rewards and punishments. And that's how it understands it. There's obviously way more to it than that, but this is a framework to help understand behavior. We have rewards and we have punishments. And there's something called operant conditioning, and operant conditioning goes off of ideas like positive reinforcement. So positive reinforcement means something that you find rewarding. If you say you get money or you get food as a reward, you're more likely to do that behavior, right? That's positive reinforcement. And so from the perspective of trolling, if someone happens to derive pleasure from it for a variety of reasons, which we said, that can be positively reinforcing. So then the person who is harassing or trolling is going to feel pleasure. They're more likely to engage in that. And I think there's some nuance here. It's not just the act of trolling. I think it's what you alluded to. It's getting a rise out of someone. That's giving them the pleasure and the satisfaction. So we don't want to give them that pebble or that reward. We want to block it. Don't feed the troll. And then if you do that, that'll sort of taper it off a bit, or at least in some ways. So that's positive reinforcement for why someone might engage in trolling. There's also something called negative reinforcement, which is taking something bad away. So like, for example, someone that's engaging in trolling may have their own mental health issues that they're managing, and engaging in trolling may temporarily alleviate their anxiety and their depression and God knows what else is going on in their life. It's not a healthy way of doing that, but it's still going to reinforce that behavior. So that's a perspective of thinking about it. The other thing, is so that you have, I know this is kind of complicated, but you have operant conditioning, and then there's something called classical conditioning, which is, if you've ever heard of Pavlov's dogs. So when a dog salivates when you pair a bell and a food, you pair it 100 times, the dog learns that the bell means food, so it starts to salivate that, right? Similarly, if you have trolling behavior and you pair trolling behavior with pleasure, that person is gonna, and you become the symbol of pleasure, because every time they harass you or they troll you and you say, leave me alone, they get pleasure from that. You have now become associated with pleasure. And so they're going to salivate to that, so to speak, whenever they see your name pop online or whatever they think about trolling. And so that's why the block button is so important. You want to break that association, right? And
now,
so reasons why not feeding the trolls is important.
It's like this power struggle, because the ego wants to like get the last word in. Like, you got to get the last word. You know that you're better than what this person just said, and you're going to show them, and you're going to tell them, and you're going to change their entire mindset and worldview in just 280 characters. And the truth is, like, that's not what's going to happen. They're going to just continually pick apart everything you say. And then they're going to, once they feel like they've used up one particular side of an argument, they're going to move on to another. And then they're going to attack the person and get into ad hominem stuff. And it's just, there is no winner like in that. And that's one thing I've found. And it's one of the things that I've helped advise Alicia on, because of the number of things that she deals with. And it's like, so Alicia and I have been friends since 2010. Gosh, 10 years. It's crazy. But so we talk every single day. And so I have a really good sense of what's going on. And there's just stuff that she deals with that I know her, and she wants to get that last word in. It's right there. And it's sometimes we just talk to each other, and I got to talk her down. Sometimes she's like, the hell with it, I'm just going to do it. And that's fine too. But man, it's like, there is a very real innate struggle with just hitting that block button. But that's why I say there's a lot of power in that.
There's a lot of power. Can I just add two important points to that? Because I think it's so important. So one is, it's kind of like a slot machine. So if you make the decision to block, it's probably a good idea to maintain that boundary. Because if you break that boundary and you give them a response once every 50 times, they're going to get a big pleasure hit. And so that's going to maintain the behavior. So once you've decided to make the decision to block, keep it, because that's important. But on the other hand, there is also something to be said about getting your voice in, because that's really important, at least from the mental health perspective of the target. So it doesn't feel good to be trampled on and to be trolled and harassed. And so sometimes we need it for our own integrity to say what we need to say. And I'm all for that because I think that can have positive mental health consequences. Once you say it, then you put up a boundary and then you maintain it. I think that's probably a good healthy way.
So I've had situations, and it's dependent on the person trolling, right? Because like you said, this is a spectrum here of many different types of people. It's multifaceted. Some of my trolls take a block as a response, and they love that. And they just create another account and come on back, and create another account and come on back. And then
Sock puppets.
Is that, yeah, I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah, the term is sock puppet accounts. They have many different hands, right?
Yeah, so then it's kind of, I've played with different responses, right? There's been times where my followers know I love a good clap back, right? I will clap back every so often, not everything by any means, but if there's like a good one in there, I'm like, all right, let's go. Because there is a part of me that does feel like these people need to be confronted. And I know I'm not going to teach anybody anything, okay? I don't feel like I'm that entitled to this, but I do think it's important that we show people also what's happening, because this is a real part that a lot of people don't understand. And for people who get trolled, it is exhausting, absolutely exhausting sometimes. And you see people who are notorious for it, right? Like we see Chrissy Teigen. She's a great example. She by no means responds to everything, but every once in a while she'll do a quick one. And I've seen that happen and work wonders, and trolls will be like, all right, I was just kidding. I'm sorry. And then they like change their whole dynamic. And I don't know what that was. Then there's the other type of troll that any attention is good attention, where you mentioned earlier, it's their reinforcement. If they have some kind of sick pleasure in hurting people, then that's their treat. That's their good boy treat. So, and then I've been in situations where I've just left it alone and not even responded, didn't block. I'm like, you know what? You want to be a mad, salty bitch? Then you're going to get ringside tickets to my show, baby. Let's go. And I'm just going to let you watch and stay mad. You're going to go all through. And I kind of like that response now, because I've been toying around with these different ones. Right now, I kind of like leaving them unblocked and just leaving them. Just say whatever you want now. I don't care. I'm not going to block you because you're just going to come back even more mad. And I'm just going to let you watch and stay mad.
You are coming up on that. You are coming up on that 2 to 3 year thing, right?
And thank you, Jay. It's true. And I feel it. And I'm sure my followers have noticed it too. I know
I have. I've gotten fewer texts. Like that all hell is breaking loose in your mentions. So
it's true. It takes time.
That your skin is getting thicker for sure.
It's true. It really is true. And it takes time and it takes practice. And thank God for Jay, and thank God for, people like you, doctor, that can help us and be a support system. And then the other side of it too is, I've been really focusing on the good things, on the positive. Like social media has brought us three together to talk about this really important subject, I think. And that's a really cool thing. I've seen social media raise funds for amazing causes and create movements, and bring attention to things that a lot of people didn't know about that they should know about. And I've seen it empower people, and I've seen it motivate people. And I've just seen so many rad things come out of social media. And that's the shit like I really love to focus on.
Yeah, love it. Both of those truths coexist, the good and the bad. And we want to cultivate the good and find ways to cope with the bad.
Mm-hmm. You can't have one without the other, and you can't appreciate one without the other. So, that's a really, really important point. And, it does bear repeating that there's a ton of good that happens on social media. I think personally and just societally, there's countless things. I mean, we wouldn't have the awareness of some of the things that are going on in this world right now without social media. So yeah, it bears repeating, but there's also plenty of stuff to just feel good about there. So
from the health perspective too, the the largest reason I'm still on social media is because of how much I learn from colleagues and from social media. And I think other people would echo those sentiments as well. It's such a world of learning that it's worth sometimes it's worth doing our ethical duty, promoting this kind of evidence-based healthcare that we do, and finding a way to manage harassment when that comes up. And it gets easier, and yes, social support helps, and it's so interesting again just how the same principles kind of apply in our different worlds, but it's all kind of circles around this truth. So I really appreciate you guys in this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you as well. I mean, it's been fascinating to learn all this stuff. I hope folks who have been watching this have gotten a lot out of it too. And you know, I stay in social media. I stay on social media because I feel like I can make a positive difference in my professional life and my personal life. And so, you know, as long as I have that, I'm going to stay. But this has been eye-opening for me, just to learn so much about this kind of digital world that I live in at least 40 hours a week. So thank you so much for your time spending with us and giving us some insight into what's going on, because like I said, Alicia and I have had a lot of conversations where we've had a lot of theories and hypotheses about what causes this and what drives this. So to actually hear some of this stuff I think it's been amazing.
My pleasure. And I love how you guys are open to this topic, and yeah, the more awareness, the better. So I really appreciate you guys lending your time to it as well.
Thank you guys so much for joining me, for joining each other, for just all of this. This is something that we've been looking forward to for a very long time. I'm sure we could go on and on for hours about this, and I would love to. If this is something that you guys want to continue to do at another time, or join back up again to do another, you know, hash through another topic similar to this, or this again, part 2, whatever. Let me know.
I've got a hot button right now for cancel culture. So if we want to do that.
Oh, cancel culture. Oh my God.
I am all in on cancel culture.
I wrote a paper on that too, or a little post, but yeah. Yeah.
We got a part 2 coming then.
We do. Okay. If you guys are on board, I'm on board. And I have to say, I know that we first approached this as like mental health and social media, and I got a ton of amazing responses of people that wanted to join in. And then once the 3 of us got to talking a little bit, we decided we were going to kind of focus more on the troll aspect. So that is something definitely I want to touch on in a more broader aspect, I think. But I think we can absolutely do that along with cancel culture. And I mean, Jay, I know this is something you've been talking about wanting to do for yourself as well, kind of creating a platform for social media centered discussions and talks and whatnot. So I think that would be a great, you know, launching pad if that's something that you wanted to do too. And yeah, I just thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. And I'll go ahead and include links that you guys find important, or you want me to share maybe some of the articles that you, oh my God, my mother's calling me.
Come on, Barb.
Barb! I'll go ahead and include some links for people to reference that you guys kind of touched on here, if you guys have those articles,
Yep.
Obviously the ones that you've written too. And yeah, just create this as kind of a resource for people. So I think it's great. And I appreciate everything that you guys offered today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, both of you.
Anything else you guys want to touch on before we head out?
Be nice to each other.
Kindness and compassion.
That's it.
So I can't say suck my dick.
In a nice way, you can.
No comment.
I'm kidding. Okay. Love y'all. Thank you so much. And let's do this again.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.